the Royal Court of Shadows. The throne hall of the Dark Queen was built to make visitors feel small. The ceiling rose high into darkness, and thin streams of blue fire floated in the air like silent stars. Black crystal pillars lined the walls, each carved with symbols of conquered worlds. At the far end of the hall stood the throne itself, shaped from dark metal and sharp edges, glowing faintly with cold purple light. Warriors from many species stood in 2 long rows. Some had heavy armor with glowing lines across their chests. Others carried long energy weapons that hummed softly. No one spoke loudly in this hall unless the queen allowed it. She ruled half the outer systems. Her name alone could start wars. Tonight, the court gathered to see something unusual. A human. The massive doors opened slowly, and a single soldier walked inside. He was not tall compared to the alien guards. He did not wear shining armor or carry advanced weapons. His uniform was simple and dark. A small emblem of Earth rested on his chest. There were no decorations, no medals, no glowing shields around him. He walked forward with steady steps. Whispers moved across the hall. "That is the human envoy?" "He looks ordinary." "This is humanity's warrior?" The Dark Queen leaned slightly forward on her throne. Her skin shimmered like shadowed silver, and her eyes glowed with faint violet light. For she studied the human carefully as he approached the center of the hall. "State your name," she commanded. The human stopped at a respectful distance. He did not kneel fully. He lowered his head slightly, but not deeply. "Commander Elias Ward," he replied calmly. His voice was steady, not loud, not nervous. A few alien generals exchanged amused looks. The Queen's lips curved into a slow smile. "So this is humanity's representative," she said, her voice echoing softly through the chamber. I expected something more impressive." Soft laughter followed her words. Elias did not move. The Queen rose from her throne and slowly walked down the steps toward him. Her long black robes flowed across the stone floor. She circled him once, examining his simple uniform. "No power armor?" she asked lightly. "No energy shield? No visible weapons?" The court began to laugh louder now. "Perhaps humans are braver than they are wise," one general said. Or perhaps they sent their weakest soldier," another added. The Queen stopped directly in front of Elias. She was taller than him by a full head. "Tell me, Commander," she said, her tone playful but sharp. "Did your people truly believe you could stand before me and command respect dressed like this?" Elias met her glowing eyes without hesitation. "I did not come to command respect," he answered. That response made some of the laughter fade. The Queen raised one elegant brow. "Oh, then why are you here?" "To deliver a message." The court quieted slightly. The Queen folded her hands behind her back. "Speak your message, human." Elias took a slow breath. "Humanity wishes to maintain peace along our shared border systems. We propose mutual stability and non-interference." For a moment, silence held the hall. Then the Queen laughed. It was not loud, but it was clear. "Peace?" she repeated. "You come alone, unprotected, to request peace?" She turned toward her court. Do you hear this? The humans now ask for stability." The hall filled with laughter again. "You survived your pirate wars because stronger empires were distracted," one officer shouted. "Humans are clever, but small," another voice added. The Queen turned back to Elias, her expression amused. "You speak of peace, yet your species hides behind alliances and trade deals. You rely on others." Elias listened quietly. The Queen leaned closer, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Tell me, Commander Ward," she said softly, "if I decided today that humanity was no longer useful, what would you do?" The question hung in the air. Guards tightened their grips on their weapons. Energy hum increased slightly. Elias did not step back. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply answered, "We would adapt." Some laughter returned, but it sounded thinner now. The Queen studied him carefully. There was no fear in his eyes, no anger, no desperation, just calm certainty. "You stand in my hall without protection," she said. "Your fleet waits far beyond my capital. If I chose to end you here, your people would not reach you in time." "That is correct," Elias replied. A few generals looked confused by how easily he accepted that. The Queen smiled again, sharper this time. "And yet you still came." "Yes." "Why?" Elias held her gaze. "Because strength that needs to prove itself rarely lasts." The words settled heavily in the chamber. For a brief moment, while the hall felt colder, the Queen's expression did not change, but her eyes hardened slightly. "Are you threatening me, human?" "No," Elias said calmly. "I am offering clarity." The silence stretched. Finally, the Queen stepped back and let out a small dismissive laugh. "You are bold," she said. "But boldness without power is simply pride." Elias nodded once. "Then we are finished." He turned. The court reacted with surprise. He was walking away. No argument, no anger, and no defense of humanity's honor. He simply walked toward the massive doors. The Queen watched him go, her lips curved in a confident smile. "Humans," she said to her court, "always dramatic." The doors opened slowly as Elias reached them. Just before he stepped through, the Queen's chief advisor moved closer to her throne and spoke in a low voice. "Your Majesty," the advisor whispered carefully. He did not ask for protection. The Queen kept watching the human's back as he exited the hall. And?" she replied calmly. The advisor hesitated for a fraction of a second. He did not need it. The soldier they should have studied. The great doors of the throne hall closed behind Commander Elias Ward with a deep metallic echo. For a few seconds, the Dark Queen remained standing where he had left her, her expression calm and controlled. The court slowly returned to quiet discussion, though the earlier laughter did not fully return. And something about the human's composure had unsettled more than one general, even if they did not admit it openly. The Queen turned back toward her throne with graceful confidence. "Prepare the diplomatic archive," she ordered lightly. "Record that humanity seeks stability." Her tone suggested the matter was already beneath her concern. To her, the meeting had been simple. A smaller power had come to request peace. It had been granted nothing and threatened nothing. And there was no reason to give it further weight, yet her chief advisor did not move immediately. "Your Majesty," the advisor said carefully, keeping his voice low but clear enough to be heard. "Commander Elias Ward is not an ordinary envoy." The Queen paused slightly before sitting. "No envoy walks alone without escort. That is already obvious." "He is not only an envoy," the advisor continued. "He is a frontier commander. His record is unusual." That word caught the attention of several nearby officers. The Queen leaned back against her throne. "Unusual in what way?" The advisor activated a thin holographic screen between them. Data and battle reports appeared in blue light. 3 cycles ago, outer human colonies were attacked by a pirate alliance led by the Vosk clans. The clans were supplied by black market weapons from unknown sources. Humanity's response was led by Commander Ward. The Queen's eyes moved across the data slowly. "He commanded a fleet?" she asked. "No," the advisor replied. "He commanded a task unit, small ships, limited resources." "And the result?" "The pirate alliance collapsed within 6 months. A few generals exchanged surprised looks. "That is not rare," one officer said. "Pirate groups destroy themselves." The advisor shook his head slightly. The Vosk clans had survived for over 2 decades before encountering him. The Queen's gaze sharpened. The holographic report shifted to show more details. Trade routes stabilized. Smuggling networks disappeared. Minor systems that once feared pirate raids began aligning trade agreements with humanity. He did not declare war, the advisor continued. He did not make public threats. He simply reorganized patrol patterns and closed supply chains. The pirates lost support, lost momentum, and disappeared. The Queen remained silent as she studied the information. He prefers indirect solutions, the advisor added. He avoids open conflict when possible. But when forced into combat, his record shows no defeats. A faint murmur passed through the nearby officers. General Marveth stepped forward. If he is so effective, the general asked, why send him here alone? The advisor answered calmly, that is what concerns me. The Queen folded her hands lightly. Explain. Commander Ward does not waste presence, the advisor said. If he walked into your throne hall without visible power, it was intentional. He wanted us to react exactly as we did. The Queen's lips curved slightly. And what was our reaction? We laughed, the advisor said. Silence returned for a brief moment. The Queen did not enjoy being told she had been predictable. He offered peace, she said firmly. That shows weakness. The advisor met her gaze carefully. Or it shows that he believes humanity no longer needs to prove strength. That idea lingered longer than anyone expected. Across the chamber, another intelligence officer activated additional reports. There is more, Your Majesty, the officer said. After he left the hall, human patrol ships along our shared border have already begun adjusting routes. The Queen frowned slightly. Adjusting how? They are reducing presence in several shared trade sectors. That benefits us, one general said quickly. It leaves more room for our fleets. The officer shook his head. Those sectors include neutral systems that rely heavily on human escort for protection from raiders. The Queen understood immediately. And if humans withdraw completely? Instability may increase, the officer replied. Our fleets would need to compensate. The Queen stood again, this time slower. Are you suggesting he came here not to beg for stability, but to warn us that he can remove it? The advisor nodded slightly. Yes, Your Majesty. The room grew colder. The Queen replayed the meeting in her mind. The human had not defended his species emotionally. He had not reacted when insulted. He had not argued policy or demanded terms. He had simply delivered a message and walked away. He did not seek approval. He did not seek validation. He did not even try to win the room. Then he expected consequences to speak later. That level of confidence, the advisor said quietly, does not come from weakness. The Queen walked slowly toward the edge of the throne platform and looked down the length of the dark hall. The human had walked that path without hesitation, no fear, no anger. Track his departure, she ordered. Moments later, a navigation officer responded. His shuttle has entered high orbit. No escort fleet detected within close range. Where are the nearest human military groups? She asked. 2 systems away, not moving toward us. The Queen narrowed her eyes. He truly had come alone. That realization unsettled her more than any fleet would have. A species that needed protection would never risk sending a valuable commander without escort into a hostile court. General Marveth spoke again. Perhaps he was reckless. The Queen shook her head slightly. No, reckless soldiers show tension. He showed none. Her gaze shifted toward the advisor. Prepare full intelligence review of human border activities. I want daily updates. The advisor bowed slightly. At once, Your Majesty. As the court slowly dispersed, quiet discussions replaced earlier mockery. The laughter that had filled the chamber felt distant now, almost embarrassing. The Queen remained standing alone for a moment longer. She could still see him walking away. No raised voice, no threats, no desperation, just certainty. And somewhere deep within her thoughts, a small doubt formed. Not about his courage, but about her first reaction. For the first time since the meeting began, she wondered whether the human had already achieved exactly what he came to accomplish. The silence after his departure. Within 3 cycles of Commander Elias Ward's departure from Varixen Prime, subtle changes began to ripple across the shared border systems. At first, but they seemed small enough to ignore. A human patrol group altered its route slightly. A trade convoy that usually passed through a contested sector chose an alternate path. Diplomatic outposts that had operated quietly for years began reducing staff. None of these movements were aggressive. None were hostile. They were simply absent. The Dark Queen received daily reports, just as she had ordered. Each one contained the same quiet pattern. Human ships were not increasing military presence. And they were not gathering fleets. They were not positioning for attack. They were stepping back. "Clarify," the Queen said during one briefing, her voice steady but sharp. "Are they retreating?" The intelligence officer hesitated. "No, Your Majesty. They are consolidating." The difference was small in wording, but large in meaning. "How many systems are affected?" she asked. 6 border sectors so far, mostly mixed trade regions." The Queen turned slightly toward the central projection display. Blue lines showed common trade routes between human space and smaller neutral systems. Many of those lines had dimmed over the past few days. "Economic impact?" she asked calmly. The financial advisor responded. "Minor for now. However, several outer colonies depend heavily on joint patrol stability. Without human presence, piracy risk increases." The Queen's expression did not change. But she remembered her advisor's earlier warning. Commander Ward had not threatened force. He had spoken of stability. Now, stability was quietly shifting. Across the outer territories, independent systems began noticing the changes more clearly. On the planet Arthas Minor, merchants who once relied on human escort vessels began sending emergency transmissions requesting increased security. On the mining stations near the Kreelan corridor, trade captains reported rising pirate sightings. And these pirates were not organized yet, but they were testing gaps. In the human command centers, the response was simple. Patrol fleets were reassigned inward. Defensive formations tightened around core human systems. Border advisory messages were sent to neutral worlds, politely informing them that human security guarantees were under review pending diplomatic outcomes. The language was careful, calm, professional. The Dark Queen sat alone in her private chamber reviewing these updates. And the room was dimly lit, and the only sound was the low hum of the data projectors. She replayed her memory of the human commander standing before her throne. "You asked what we would do if you decided we were no longer useful," he had said quietly. "We would adapt." At the time, the statement had seemed abstract. Now it felt precise. General Marveth entered the chamber without ceremony, a sign of urgency. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing briefly. "My pirate activity in the Tarsan Belt has increased. 2 merchant ships were intercepted." "Human ships?" she asked immediately. "No, independent traders." The Queen stood slowly. "And our patrol response?" "Delayed. We cannot cover every route without stretching forces thin." The reality was becoming clear. For years, the human presence along shared systems had quietly reduced the burden on Imperial fleets. Humanity had never claimed authority in those sectors, and they had simply operated efficiently. Their patrols had discouraged smaller threats. Their alliances with neutral systems had stabilized trade, The Queen had mistaken cooperation for dependence. Another report arrived moments later. A minor border world formally requested emergency military protection from the Empire, citing instability after human patrol withdrawal. The planet had previously declined Imperial oversight, preferring shared trade agreements with humans. The Queen's eyes hardened. "They are shifting pressure." Marveth frowned. "They are not attacking." "No," she replied. "They are reminding us of the cost of disrespect." Across her empire, whispers began circulating. Some officers privately questioned the wisdom of dismissing the human commander. Others argued that humans were testing Imperial patience. Younger strategists began studying human tactical doctrine more carefully. Reports showed that humans often avoided open war unless absolutely necessary. Instead, they created environments where opponents faced increased internal strain. Commander Ward had not needed to argue in the throne hall. He had trusted that reality would demonstrate his message. Back in human space, Elias Ward stood on the command deck of a frontier cruiser. A holographic display showed updated border movements. His executive officer approached quietly. "Thus, outer sector instability increasing," she reported. "Several neutral systems are requesting re-engagement." Ward nodded once. "Maintain current posture." "No intervention?" "Not unless directly requested under formal agreement." The officer studied him briefly. "The Queen may interpret this as leverage." Ward's voice remained calm. "It is not leverage. It is consequence." He turned his attention back to the star map. Humanity had learned through history that protection was not obligation. It was partnership. Where respect existed, support flowed. Where mockery or threat appeared, support withdrew. On Varexen Prime, the Queen convened an emergency strategic council. The atmosphere was different from the earlier throne session. No laughter, no confidence built on assumption. "Our fleets are compensating," Marveth reported, "but resource strain is rising." The Queen looked around the chamber. "So how long can we maintain expanded patrol coverage without weakening other fronts?" "Not indefinitely," an officer admitted. The Queen leaned back slightly, her mind connecting the pieces. Commander Ward had entered her court alone. He had endured insult. He had offered stability. And now, without firing a shot or issuing a threat, he had demonstrated exactly how valuable that stability was. She remembered the moment he turned to leave. No anger, no pride, just certainty. "Send a diplomatic request," she ordered finally. "Direct channel, priority transmission." "To Commander Ward?" the advisor asked. "Yes." The advisor hesitated briefly. "What shall we say?" The Queen's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "We will say that the Empire wishes to revisit discussions regarding cooperative border management." No admission of error. No apology yet. But the shift in tone was clear. As the council dispersed, the Queen remained seated longer than usual. She had mocked a soldier who did not need her approval. She had dismissed a message delivered calmly. Now the consequences were unfolding exactly as he intended, not through violence, but through absence. For the first time, she considered a possibility that unsettled her deeply. The human had never come to ask for peace. He had come to prove that humanity could remove it. The weight of absence. The diplomatic request left Varexen Prime under secure encryption, traveling across multiple relays before reaching human-controlled space. The Dark Queen did not allow herself to show impatience, but every passing cycle increased strain across her outer territories. Trade convoys slowed. Insurance costs for merchants doubled. Minor systems that once praised Imperial oversight now complained about delayed fleet responses. The absence of human patrol vessels was not dramatic, but it was measurable. And it was like the quiet removal of a support beam from a massive structure. The building did not collapse immediately, but pressure began shifting in uncomfortable ways. In her private war chamber, the Queen stood before a large holographic projection of the border sectors. Colored markers represented patrol strength, piracy risk, and trade flow. The red indicators were growing slowly but steadily. General Marveth entered with updated tactical data. We have reassigned 2 additional patrol groups to the Kreelan corridor, he reported. However, that leaves the Vosk expanse underdefended. The Queen's eyes narrowed at the mention of the Vosk region. Years earlier, that same region had been destabilized by pirate alliances until human forces reorganized it. Now the pirates were testing those gaps again. And the humans? She asked. They remain within their consolidated positions. No aggressive maneuvers. To no fleet buildup near our territory. The Queen felt a quiet frustration rise within her. If humanity had gathered fleets near her border, she could have justified military escalation. If they had issued threats, she could have rallied support behind a show of strength. But they had done neither. They had simply stepped back and allowed the natural consequences of that absence to unfold. An intelligence officer approached carefully. Your Majesty, we have received a reply from Commander Ward. The Queen turned immediately. Display it. The message appeared as simple text on the projection wall. It was brief. Human Command acknowledges receipt of your request. Cooperative border management discussions can resume once mutual respect is formally recognized. The chamber remained silent for several moments. General Marveth broke the quiet. They demand apology? The Queen read the message again slowly. It did not demand apology. It demanded recognition. The difference was subtle but important. They demand respect, she corrected calmly. Marveth's tone hardened slightly. Your Majesty, if we yield publicly, it may appear as weakness. The Queen looked at him steadily. What appears weaker? She asked. A ruler who adjusts strategy, or a ruler who allows her outer systems to deteriorate because of pride? The general did not respond. Across the outer territories, unrest was growing. Minor systems that once trusted the Empire to manage trade stability began questioning their long-term security. Some sent cautious inquiries to human space asking whether patrol agreements could resume. Humanity's response remained measured. Agreements would be honored where mutual cooperation existed. No hostility, only policy. Commander Elias Ward stood once again in a quiet observation room aboard his cruiser, reviewing reports of pirate resurgence and neutral system anxiety, and his communications officer approached. The Queen's request suggests willingness to negotiate, she said. Do you expect them to admit fault? Ward shook his head slightly. They will not admit fault directly, but they will adjust language. And that is enough? It is, he replied calmly. Respect does not require humiliation. He understood that pushing too hard would turn correction into conflict. The goal had never been dominance, it had been balance. Back on Varexon Prime, the Queen convened a smaller, more discreet council. Only her most trusted advisors were present. Draft a formal declaration, she ordered. State that the Empire recognizes humanity as equal partners in shared border security. The advisor paused slightly. Equal, Your Majesty? Yes, she answered firmly. Equal. The word felt heavier than she expected. Her empire had not used it often. The declaration was prepared carefully. It avoided direct reference to the throne hall incident. Yet its meaning was unmistakable. Humanity was acknowledged as a sovereign power whose cooperation was valued, not tolerated. Before transmission, the Queen stood alone once more in her throne hall. The same dark pillars surrounded her. The same throne stood at the far end. She walked slowly across the stone platform where Commander Ward had stood. The floor had been repaired, yet she could still remember exactly where he had faced her without hesitation. She replayed her own laughter in her memory. It now felt careless. He did not raise his voice, she said quietly to herself. He did not threaten. He simply left. And by leaving, he had created more impact than if he had argued. The declaration was transmitted. Within 2 cycles, human patrol routes began gradually restoring presence in selected shared sectors. The increase in piracy slowed. Trade confidence improved. Neutral systems sent formal appreciation messages to both powers. The balance returned not through conquest, but through correction. General Marveth observed the change in the data charts and spoke privately to the Queen. "It appears the humans were never testing our strength," he admitted. The Queen nodded slowly. "They were testing our wisdom." Marveth hesitated. "And if we had ignored their absence longer?" She looked toward the vast projection of her empire stretching across star systems. Then we would have weakened ourselves without a single enemy shot." Commander Ward received confirmation of the declaration while reviewing patrol deployment schedules. He read it once and then closed the display calmly. "Resume full cooperative patrol structure," he ordered. His officers obeyed without question. There was no celebration aboard his ship, no victory announcement, just quiet continuation of duty. Back in the throne hall, the Queen addressed her court publicly for the first time since the humans' visit. "Power is not proven by crushing what stands before us," she declared. "It is proven by recognizing what stands beside us." Some in the court were surprised by her tone, but none challenged it. The incident was archived officially as a diplomatic recalibration. But those who were present that first night would remember it differently. They remembered a human who walked into a hall of shadows and endured mockery without anger and walked away without fear. And they understood now that the greatest strength is often the one that does not need to shout. The Queen who began to understand. The restoration of joint patrol routes stabilized the outer sectors faster than many expected. Merchant convoys resumed normal schedules. Pirate sightings decreased as quickly as they had increased. Neutral systems that had grown anxious began sending formal messages of appreciation to both the Empire and humanity. On the surface, balance had returned. Trade flowed. Borders remained secure. The crisis passed without a single battle. Yet inside the Dark Queen's mind, something far more important was still shifting. She stood once more in the royal court of shadows, but this time there was no public gathering. The hall was empty except for a few silent guards positioned along the walls. And the blue fire streams flickered softly against the black crystal pillars. The throne remained high and imposing, but it felt different now. Not weaker, just quieter. She walked slowly to the center of the stone platform where Commander Elias Ward had once stood. Her steps echoed across the chamber. She replayed every detail in her memory. His posture, his calm tone, the way he answered her question about extinction with a single word. "We would adapt." At the time, she had heard defiance, and now she heard confidence. Her chief advisor entered quietly, but did not interrupt her thoughts. He had served her long enough to recognize when silence was necessary. After a moment, she spoke without turning toward him. "I believed he came to protect his people from us," she said softly. The advisor responded carefully. "He came to protect stability." She nodded slightly, "And I mistook that for weakness." The advisor did not disagree. Many rulers mistake patience for submission." The Queen looked toward the far end of the hall where she had first laughed at him. The memory no longer felt victorious. It felt short-sighted. Humanity had not reacted emotionally. They had not demanded apology. They had simply demonstrated their value by removing it. "That is a dangerous lesson," she said quietly. "Indeed," the advisor replied. "A power that can withdraw without collapsing is difficult to threaten." Across the Empire, commanders were already adjusting strategic doctrine. Military academies introduced new courses on cooperative deterrence. Intelligence divisions began studying human negotiation patterns more closely. The focus was no longer on defeating humanity in theoretical conflict. It was on understanding how they maintained balance. Meanwhile, in human space, Commander Ward received updates confirming full restoration of cooperative agreements. Trade networks had stabilized completely. Neutral systems had regained confidence. The mission had achieved its objective. His executive officer approached with a subtle smile. "Outer sector leaders are expressing renewed trust," she said. The Queen's declaration carried weight. Ward nodded. "Good." She studied him for a moment. "Do you regret not confronting her more directly?" He considered the question briefly before answering. "No. Conflict solves immediate pride. Consequences solve long-term behavior." His officer nodded slowly, absorbing the simplicity of the statement. Back on Varexon Prime, the Queen summoned a smaller private council consisting of her most strategic thinkers. She did not frame the meeting as an emergency. Instead, she framed it as evolution. "We did not lose power," she began calmly. "We learned where it begins and ends." General Marveth spoke carefully. Human strength appears tied to internal resilience rather than external display. "Yes," the Queen agreed. "They endure insult without reaction because they do not rely on external approval." The council members listened closely. "They are not fearless," she continued. "They simply do not fear the same things we do." That insight resonated deeply in the chamber. The Empire feared loss of dominance. Humanity feared loss of survival. Those fears shaped strategy differently, and the Queen stood and walked slowly along the inner circle of her council. "If they are respected, they cooperate," she said. "If they are mocked, they withdraw. That is predictable." Marveth asked cautiously, "And if they are attacked?" The Queen stopped walking. "Then they adapt," she replied quietly. "And that is the scenario we must avoid." Her voice carried no anxiety, only understanding. Days later, she made a decision that surprised many in her inner court. She requested a formal diplomatic summit. Not in her throne hall, but in a neutral orbital station between both territories. The symbolism was clear. This time, there would be no elevated throne, no dark crystal pillars, just equal ground. When Commander Ward received the invitation, he studied it carefully. There was no hidden threat, no political maneuver disguised as courtesy. It was direct. His communications officer looked at him curiously. "Will you attend personally?" "Yes," he replied. "Are you alone?" "No," he said calmly. "This time, we attend as partners." The orbital station meeting was simple and controlled. No grand speeches, no public humiliation. The Dark Queen arrived without excessive ceremonial display. Commander Ward arrived without visible military intimidation. When they stood facing each other across a neutral table, the atmosphere was different from their first meeting. There was no laughter, no mockery. The Queen spoke first. "Commander Ward," she said evenly, "your message was received." Ward inclined his head slightly. "That was the intention." She held his gaze. "Your restraint prevented conflict, and your adjustment preserved stability," he replied. There was no need for apology. The understanding between them was sufficient. As negotiations continued over trade agreements and patrol coordination, observers from both sides noticed the shift clearly. It was not submission, it was maturity. And back in the Dark Queen's private chamber that evening, she stood before a large window overlooking the stars. Her advisor joined her silently. "He walked away," she said quietly, "and I believed I had won." The advisor allowed a faint smile. "In a way, you did." She looked at him. "You won clarity," he finished. She watched the stars carefully. She had mocked a soldier who needed no validation. She had mistaken calm for weakness. She had laughed at a message she did not yet understand. And now she understood fully. The human had not walked away because he feared her power. He walked away because he did not need it. The lesson that echoed across the stars. The diplomatic summit on the neutral orbital station marked more than a policy adjustment between two powers. It marked a shift in how both civilizations would view strength in the future. The meeting itself had been calm and efficient, focused on shared patrol zones, trade stability, and crisis coordination. No public speeches were made, no dramatic declarations were issued. Yet the tone of the agreement carried greater weight than any threat ever could. Humanity and the Dark Queen's empire were no longer positioned as rivals measuring each other's pride. They stood as neighboring forces acknowledging each other's permanence. Across the empire, the effects of this realization began to appear quietly. Training academies updated their strategy simulations to include human adaptive doctrine. The officers were instructed to study not only enemy fleet formations, but also economic influence patterns and indirect stabilization tactics. Military scholars debated the concept of strength through restraint, a phrase that had begun circulating informally after the Throne Hall encounter. Some commanders resisted the shift at first, believing traditional dominance should remain the primary path to authority. However, data from the border sector spoke clearly. Where cooperation existed, prosperity followed. Where tension escalated, costs multiplied. The Dark Queen herself became more measured in her public appearances. She did not soften her image, she did not abandon authority. Instead, she refined it. Her speeches began emphasizing stability, continuity, and intelligent leadership, rather than conquest and intimidation. Observers noted that she no longer dismissed smaller species in her court. She listened longer before responding. The memory of her laughter in the throne hall had not disappeared from her mind. It had transformed into a reminder. In human territory, Commander Elias Ward resumed his normal operational duties as if the diplomatic episode were simply another completed assignment. His ship rotated through patrol sectors, coordinating with neutral systems and updating defense networks. To his crew, the meeting with the Dark Queen was not treated as a triumph. It was a resolved scenario. The humanity's approach remained consistent: avoid unnecessary war, maintain preparedness, and let actions carry meaning without theatrics. However, the story of the Throne Hall traveled quickly beyond both governments. Traitors carried the tale from system to system. Young cadets in distant academies repeated the account with slight exaggerations, describing how a human soldier endured mockery without flinching and shifted the balance of power without drawing a weapon. In some versions, the story became legend. In others, it became a lesson. The Dark Queen understood the importance of narrative. She allowed the story to spread without suppression. Let the galaxy know, she decided, that the Empire could adapt as well. Suppressing the tale would only confirm insecurity. Allowing it to circulate demonstrated confidence. One evening, she summoned her chief advisor privately once again. The stars beyond her chamber window shimmered quietly as she spoke. "Do you believe the humans intended to humiliate us?" she asked. The advisor answered carefully. "No, Your Majesty. They intended to prevent future humiliation." She considered that deeply. Humanity had endured public dismissal in her court, yet they had not responded with retaliation. They responded with demonstration and adjustment. It was a form of discipline that required patience few rulers possessed. "And if another power mocks them again?" she asked. "They will repeat the lesson," the advisor replied calmly. "But perhaps louder next time." The Queen nodded slowly. She understood now that humanity's restraint was conditional, not permanent. They could remove support quietly. They could shift trade patterns. They could reorganize alliances. If forced, they could escalate. The difference was that escalation would be precise, not reckless. Meanwhile, Commander Ward received a private transmission from the Queen herself. And it was not formal policy. It was personal. The message was brief. The Empire recognizes the value of balance. Your demonstration was understood. Ward read it once before responding with equal brevity. Mutual understanding preserves peace. There were no further words exchanged. None were needed. Over the following cycles, minor species across shared territories began forming councils that included both human and imperial representatives. Joint patrol exercises were conducted openly, not as signs of intimidation, but as assurance. Piracy declined significantly. Economic growth resumed in previously unstable zones. Stability became the shared objective rather than dominance. The Queen occasionally reflected on that first meeting. She no longer replayed it with frustration. She replayed it as instruction. She realized that her power had not been diminished by acknowledging humanity. It had been strengthened. A ruler who refuses to adapt becomes predictable. A ruler who evolves becomes enduring. In the distant future, historians would mark that encounter not as a diplomatic crisis, but as a turning point, the moment when two powers chose respect over escalation. And at the center of that turning point stood a quiet, human soldier who had accepted mockery without anger, walked away without fear, and proved that the greatest strength is the one that does not need to announce itself. The galaxy continued to shift, as it always did. And new tensions would rise, new species would emerge, but the lesson remained constant across star systems. Strength that needs applause fades. Strength that understands silence lasts. The respect that replaced laughter. Years passed, and the memory of that first encounter in the Royal Court of Shadows did not fade. It matured. The galaxy moved forward as it always did, with new conflicts rising in distant sectors and unexpected alliances forming among smaller systems. And yet the relationship between the Dark Queen's empire and humanity remained steady. It was not built on fear. It was built on understanding forged in a single moment of misjudgment. The Dark Queen often found herself reflecting on that night. Not because it embarrassed her, but because it sharpened her. She had ruled through dominance for most of her reign. Her name carried weight because it was tied to victory. But after meeting Commander Elias Ward, she learned that long-term strength did not come from victories alone. It came from restraint applied at the right time. In her court, policies shifted slowly but clearly. When smaller species sent envoys seeking partnership, they were no longer dismissed as weak or insignificant. The Queen demanded that her advisors study their trade value, defensive capacity, and long-term potential before responding. She began to view alliances not as tools for control, but as pillars of stability. And the transformation was subtle, yet everyone within the Empire felt it. Meanwhile, humanity continued its quiet expansion, not through conquest, but through cooperation. Human trade ships traveled safely through once unstable systems. Joint patrols with Imperial fleets became routine rather than symbolic. Pirates and rogue factions, once eager to exploit political tension, found fewer gaps to test. Stability had become profitable, and profit encouraged peace. Commander Elias Ward remained a frontier leader, not a public hero. His name was known among military circles, but he did not seek recognition. When younger officers asked him about the meeting with the Dark Queen, he rarely told the full story. He would simply say, "Sometimes walking away changes more than arguing." That phrase spread quietly within human ranks. It became a principle taught in command academies. Victory was not always achieved by defeating an opponent in battle, and sometimes victory was achieved by allowing consequences to unfold naturally. On Varixen Prime, the Dark Queen requested a ceremonial exchange one final time. This gathering was not tense or political. It was formal recognition of enduring cooperation between their powers. The setting was no longer the intimidating throne hall. It was a shared diplomatic forum, designed without elevated platforms or shadows. When Commander Ward entered that chamber again, there was no laughter. The court stood in respectful silence. The Queen did not remain seated upon a throne. She stepped forward to greet him at equal distance. "You once stood in my hall and endured my mockery," she said openly, her voice calm but clear enough for all to hear. "You responded not with anger, but with patience. In that patience, you taught us something." Ward inclined his head slightly. Mutual stability benefits both sides. The Queen allowed a faint smile. "You could have chosen humiliation. Instead, you chose clarity." "And you could have chosen pride," he replied calmly. "Instead, you chose adaptation." There was no tension in the exchange, only recognition. The ceremony concluded with a joint declaration reaffirming cooperative defense and shared economic corridors. It was not dramatic. It did not alter borders, but it symbolized something larger, two powers capable of adjusting without destroying one another. After the event, as observers and diplomats dispersed, the Dark Queen walked alone through a quiet corridor lined with dark crystal panels. Her advisor followed at a respectful distance. "Do you regret mocking him?" the advisor asked gently. She paused before answering. "No," she said thoughtfully, "because without that mistake, I would not have learned." The advisor nodded slowly. Lessons earned through pride often lasted the longest. Far from the capital aboard his cruiser, the Commander Ward stood once more before a star map displaying dozens of interconnected systems. Trade routes flowed like quiet rivers across the projection. Patrol markers moved in coordinated patterns alongside Imperial fleets. Stability had become normal. His executive officer approached. "It is rare," she said quietly, "for tension to end without battle." Ward watched the stars for a moment before replying. "It is rarer," he said, "for rulers to learn." The galaxy would always remain unpredictable. Conflicts would rise again, new powers would test boundaries. But the foundation between humanity and the Dark Queen's empire had been reshaped by a single quiet encounter. The story spread across star systems as legend and instruction. Some told it as the tale of a human soldier who faced a queen without fear. Others told it as the moment a ruler discovered the cost of underestimating silence. But the core remained unchanged. The Dark Queen had mocked the human soldier. He walked away quietly. And in that quiet step, he left behind something stronger than pride. He left behind respect.